Right then, so previously I left you with this blank user area page. The command has been successful and we have been successfully logged in, yet we don't know whether the session has been set correctly yet. We don't know if we've come across any errors or anything. We've just been redirected to our user area page via this header, but we don't know if these have successfully worked. And that's where our functions.php page comes in again. This time what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a function that lets us check whether the user is logged in. So I'm going to call this a login check function. And if you're not familiar with functions, what they are, what they do, what parameters are, even though we're not using parameters in this instance, then I do have a tutorial on this in my basics playlist, so go check that out. But we're going to start creating the function. We're going to use the word function, and I'm going to call this logged in, and then 2 brackets at the end, and then a curly block for our code to go inside. Now I've got no parameters inside here, nothing's being passed, so this is really more like a procedure than a function. Okay, so inside our function, what we're going to be doing is we're going to create an if statement. So yeah, and then we're going to be creating a block at the end of that with the code to go in there if this condition is true. So this if statement is going to check is set, which means has this been set, and we're checking if the session, remember username, and this in the last part, has been set. So if the session username has been set, or is set, so we're going to use the same function again, $_cookie, so it's identical to session, even though when we're setting our session and cookie, we're using completely different methods to do it. We're using exactly the same array for this, and that is going to be username. Now these $_session and $_cookie are actually arrays. Username is just one of the elements of the array. So if you can think about it like that, then you'll pretty much have the hang of why we're using square brackets and why we're calling them exactly the same but setting them differently. Okay, so we've got is set the session, is set the cookie. So are they both set? Are either of them set? Because remember, we're either setting a session or we're either setting a cookie. So this is basically going to tell us you know, if either of them have been set. If we wanted to check if both of them are set, which we don't actually have in this instance, then we're going to use an AND operator. Otherwise we're using the OR operator. Okay, so if this is true, we're going to use a variable called logged in, and that is going to equal true. Now this alone is going to be pretty hard to work with unless we return a value, because we're going to use the logged in function inside an if statement, so we need some value to be returned, and we do this by typing return and then the value we want to return. So again, this is just a logged in boolean that I've just made up. It's a variable but with a boolean type, and we've got true here. So we're returning the value of true if this equals true. Otherwise we're not returning a value, therefore that would be automatically false. Okay, so this is pretty much done now, this function, and what we're going to do is we're going to come back to our user area.php page. In fact, what we'll just do is just quickly run this functions.php page just to check that we don't have any errors. Yeah, everything there is looking fine, we've got no errors through there. I'm going to go to the login page. Okay, so here's our login. Now what we're going to be doing with this page as well is setting it so if the user has already logged in, we're going to redirect them to the user area. In fact, yeah, we're going to do that first, because that's going to allow us to know if this cookie or session has been set in. So we've included our functions.php, ensure this is at the top all the time. Underneath here, I'm going to create an if statement. Now this is surprisingly simple. This is the simplicity of functions. Once you've created a function, it's so easy to use. our function is called logged in, remember. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if logged in header location user area.php. Now the reason for this is if the user has logged in, they're no longer going to need to use the login.php page unless they've logged out, in which case our session or our cookie won't be present. So we're basically saying if logged in, and this basically reads to a human, if logged in is true. So if the user is logged in. It's the same as writing if logged in equals true. Remember, we're returning the value of true if we are logged in. So you can write it like this if you want, but I just always prefer to write if logged in. So much quicker, and in my opinion it looks neater. So if we are logged in, we're going to go to user area.php. Remember, like I said, using some sort of security knowledge, we're going to type exit, the exit function after that, to kill the script. Okay, so let's try and come back here and we can refresh this. So I'm going to press enter, and there we are, we've been redirected to our user area page. Now if we were logged out, i.e. if a cookie or a session hadn't been set, we would have access to the login.php page. Like if I press back in my browser now, I basically can't go back to the login.php page. Every time I do go back, it checks if a cookie or a session have been set, and we know now that one has been set because using the function that I've already declared in functions.php, we're being redirected back because we're using that inside an if statement. So it all ties in together. You've just got to know where to include things and where to place your if statements, and it's just strategic positioning really, and secure positioning as well, so your users can't find ways around it. Okay, so now we can work on the user area. This is going to be ridiculously simple. All I'm basically going to do is create some PHP tags for now, and I'm going to say you're logged in underneath this. I'm going to do a paragraph break, and I'm going to create a hyperlink in HTML to logout.php, which we're going to code up a bit later. That's going to log the user out. And inside our PHP, we're going to include our functions.php because we're going to need a few parts from that. And we're basically going to say if exclamation mark, which means if not logged in. So if this has been returned as false, you can write this as if logged in equals false. It doesn't matter, it's like I mentioned before, you can write it either way. I just prefer this, it looks neater and in my opinion, and it's quicker to code. And we're going to say header location login.php, and again we're going to write our exit command underneath that. So basically all this is doing is if the user tries to attempts to access the user area.php when they're not logged in, we're going to redirect them back to the login page. Really simple. The reason it's simple is because we already have our function here which we've created in our functions.php. Just remember to include this page in order to have access to this function name. Okay, so now we can test this out and come to our user area.php, and that's letting us in because we are logged in. In the next part of the tutorial, what we can do is we can code our logout page, and then we're going to try and access the user area.php when we are logged out. So in the next part we are going to code that up.